one right here, it's a laser point.
Okay.
And to start, just press that one, it's just on a blank screen, so you don't pause it or
Okay. Is the first one up?
You don't have to point it.
Sure, yeah.
It's all
Right,
right
with that.
current.
Okay. Yes, thank you everybody for having me here today. When I said this is my first speech on the environment, it's mostly because as a Green Party candidate, I actually don't talk much about the environment. And that's because the Green Party is already known for their environmental issues. And we're not known so much for every other issue, which we do have a policy front for all sorts of, every issue that might affect you. So I actually stay clear of the environment whenever possible and talk about the economy or foreign affairs or other matter. So I've never really had to really talk like this. So what I've done is I've just basically prepared, my thoughts, questions I've been asked by people for a couple of years. This is my second time running actually as a candidate. I ran here provincially last year, so some of you may have seen my name on some signs. And so I've written down comments that I've heard, questions I've heard, some skeptic comments that I've heard, which I'll get to halfway through. Now, as someone that has not studied this for, went to school for this myself, I think that's actually something positive that I can share with you, the fact that anybody can learn this. It's not difficult stuff. It's meant to be fun, this talk today. Some of it might sound scary. It's not meant to scare you. It's meant to make you think. I'm by no means an expert, but I do have a good grasp of this. When I was at the University of Ottawa, I was part of the Eco-Justice Law Clinic, and I have a specialization in environmental law. So I can talk much about, amendments to the Environmental Assessment Act and to the, Navigable Waters Protection Act, but that can bore me, so I imagine that will probably bore you too. But part of the Eco-Justice Law Clinic was being paired up with the science students, and we would talk about the correlation between law and science with respect to policy in Canada. So I learned a lot more that way too. But something else I tell people when I am campaigning is no matter what somebody tells you, myself included, please look it up to confirm. It could be a mistake, someone could be out and out lying to you, and you don't want to be influenced by either one of those. So always, no matter what someone tells you, and we have debates coming up by the way on Rogers Cable, please watch. But whatever you hear, please look up. I'm not going to go into talking about too much. I'm trying to keep this non-partisan. Although John says I could go full on partisan, so if you want to hear me talk about the platform, I'm happy to do so. But I am keeping this non-partisan because that's how I was asked to do this. So I'm not going to really get into the different types of energy that exist, solar power, wind power versus, fossil fuels. I am going to talk a bit about fossil fuels because that does play an impact actually on climate change. But I'm not suggesting that we should stop it as a speaker here tonight. But if you want to talk to me about my own personal views on it, please do so afterwards. So, first thing that I just want to clarify is just what is climate? Basically, it's just easy to sum up as how the three terms are up there. We're not going to worry about the third one. But it's mostly just a pattern of weather. So following weather patterns, that creates climate. Does anyone know what carbon dioxide actually is? No? Okay. So, this is carbon dioxide. It's a gas. This is the molecule, and as you can see, it's 2 parts oxygen, 1 part carbon. The di in dioxide means 2, so that's why you have the dioxide. A lot of bad things have been said about carbon, but carbon actually is a good thing. It's in the air to begin with. We all breathe it out. In fact, it's one of the 4 elements actually that created life. Hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon is actually what formed life on this planet. I hope I'm not offending anyone's views on that. But from a scientific perspective, those 4 elements create life. We breathe it out. Plants breathe it out. They use carbon to turn it into oxygen and produce that out into the air during the day. That combined with sun and soil, nutrients from the soil and water, is what you may remember learning about in grade school as photosynthesis. So the more carbon in the atmosphere actually means more plant life, as long as they have access to water and soil and the sun. But like most things, too much carbon dioxide can be bad. And this is what most people think about when they think of carbon dioxide. Even though plants do absorb the carbon, part of the problem is we're actually destroying plant life. Now, I can get into a lot about world economics and how we're like slashing rainforests just to raise cattle for us to have more beef. But on a local level, I think it's important to know that we're losing about 365 acres of farmland every year. Sorry, it sounded wrong, every day. 365 acres of farmland every day. That doesn't actually mean we're taking farmland away from farmers, but we're developing on land that could be used for farming. Whereas there's other lands that aren't being developed that can't be used for farming. And once you lose farmland, it's really hard to get back. So these are the 3 most common types of fossil fuels that is causing climate change. As you can see, coal is responsible for 43%, oil 36%, and natural gas 20%. Now in Ontario, the provincial government has shut down all coal plants. And that's a really good step. As you can see, it's the main polluter. What is happening though is what's called the Energy East Pipeline. Have people heard of that? Okay, that actually runs through this riding. A lot of people don't know that, but it's coming through this riding. It's going to be sending 30 million tons of greenhouse gases every year, which is the equivalent of reopening all of the coal plants that Ontario shut down. That's straight from the College of Ottawa. It's going to be, So it's basically shutting down all the work that was done to remove the coal plants in Ontario would be annihilated with the result of this pipeline going through. As you can see, most of this is basically on transport. In 2010, the transport sector was the 2nd largest source of man-made carbon fuels. Transporting goods and people around the population is 22% of fossil fuel-related carbon dioxide emissions in 2010. So basically, all the flying that we do and all the transporting of goods and such, that basically causes a lot of fossil fuels. Now, are you going to say that a lot of it's worth it? Well, yeah, we want our stuff, right? You want food on the table, you want to go on vacations and stuff like that, but not all of it is necessary. For example, the country of Haiti. The country of Haiti produces enough corn itself to feed all of its people, but it's tied up to what's called these trade relations with the Agreement of Agriculture, with the WTO. And part of that agreement says that they have to import corn, surplus corn from the United States, because their corn is subsidized. And they have an extra lot of it, so they got to get rid of it. So they're pushing Haiti to make coffee, which they export. So they don't really drink as much coffee as the rest of the world do. So they're exporting coffee and importing corn, which they could go with their own corn. That also creates all sorts of emissions, let alone affecting their economy, but that creates a lot of emissions. If anyone has any questions, by the way, just feel free to interrupt and ask. So this graph illustrates global temperatures. Now, as you can see here, this little blip right here started in 1939, that's World War II. So obviously a lot was going on in World War II, bombs and a lot of industry to build those bombs. But if you start looking right here, from 51 to 80, it's somewhat more constant. The last 10 decades here, there's a steep increase. The last 10 decades are the hottest temperatures of recorded history. 2014 was ranked as the warmest year on record. So it is getting hotter. Now, I'm going to get to that. He just said, tell me that in January. I'm getting to that. So these are the Great Lakes, which have a special spot for me because, oops, that's Owen Sound. That's where I grew up. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention off the top, my connection with Rotary. When I was young, I spent 2 summers at a Rotary camp. It was called Presqu'île Camp, and it was sponsored by the Rotary Club. As far as I know, it still is, because they have an active website. So I do have experience with your group, and thank you very much, because that was a very, important experience in my life. As temperatures increase, more water evaporates. The more water that evaporates means the more frequent rainfall and the more chance of floods. According to National Geographic, Lake Superior, I don't know if I get this right.
The big one.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to push the button. I didn't know which one Lake Superior is. Lake Superior loses about 29 billion gallons of water every day from evaporation. As the temperatures increase, that number increases. Now, recently, the Great Lakes have leveled off a little bit. They were almost back to normal levels, but they were down to record lows in 2013. I'm going to touch on that a little bit more later about how that increase happened again. But I mean, the Great Lakes are very important. Not only does it produce about 40% of Canada's economic activity, there's $230 million a year in the fishery industry. Shipping on Great Lakes is roughly $200 million of Ontario's gross domestic product. And as the Great Lakes decrease, that means that the shipments have to be put more on the roads, which means more fossil fuels are being used or more transports. Again, if you remember what I was talking about earlier, that's one of the leading causes of global warming. Great Lakes also hold about 18% of our fresh water and supply over around 11 million to 13 million people drinking water in Ontario. So what are our leaders doing about it? They've committed, sorry, I just want to say nothing. Close. They committed at the G Summit meeting in Germany earlier this year to absolutely a no carbon economy, but not until the year 2100. So that is 85 years away. Now, that's something, but I'm going back to this map, or this chart. You can see the rise that's happened in 10 years. Now, obviously in 85 years, they're going to be, if they want it at 0, they're going to be phasing some out. But that's not going to happen for quite a while. So you can probably imagine where this is going to go to. Right now, we're at about 1 degree Celsius above 0. That's the annual average temperature, 1 degree Celsius. Many are suggesting that to prevent any further damage to the planet, we need to cap that temperature at 2 degrees Celsius. Okay? So, again, following this line, that might not happen in the next 85 years. And here's another issue with the capping it at 2 degrees Celsius. This is Mark Carney. He used to be the governor of the Bank of Canada. He's now the governor of the Bank of England. Now, he has recently said that if we are to cap annual global temperatures at 2 degrees Celsius, that there's already enough fossil fuels that exist above ground in barrels today that we can't burn all of it. I've heard about 25% of what we get of that we can burn, and not before we hit that 2 degrees Celsius. So you can imagine if all these countries that already have oil above ground, they're going to sell it at whatever they can just to get rid of it. Like, this is oil that already exists. It's not, you don't have to pump it out of the ground, it's already sitting in barrels. He calls this a carbon bubble. countries that are still pulling it out of the ground and finding new ways to pull it out of the ground, like Arctic offshore oil drilling, are going to be left behind. Now, is climate change real? I'm sure everyone's probably seen this picture. I'm not here to try to show it to try to get electricity or something like that. I just found this picture when I was going through online trying to find pictures, and this seems to be representing what most people think about climate change. It's really kind of speaks for the climate change movement. So, as I said earlier, what I'm going to do now is talk about arguments that I've heard personally and speak to the truth to them. There's many more, but I only have a few minutes, only like 20 minutes to go through this. But it maybe as a Q&A question, if you can think of other ones I can give you by best knowledge on those things. Has anybody heard this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Yeah. Okay. A lot of people throw this around on the pro and anti-climate change side, and they don't really know what this is. This is actually very important, this 97% of scientists. What it is there's actually a study, and the author of the study took peer-reviewed articles. Does everyone know what peer-reviewed is? Okay, so it's like other peers expect it, so it's like, their body of work is put online to say that this is actually an important document. This document is truthful. So they studied 11,994 peer-reviewed articles on global warming that were written between 1991 and 2001. Of those almost 1,200 papers, 97% of them said that global warming is happening and is caused by humans. So it's not just they gathered 9,700 scientists and 97 of them said this is happening. They also conducted a survey with those papers, or the authors of those almost 1,200 papers, and conducted a survey to see, is this happening? Is global warming happening? Again, 97% said yes, this is man-made. So that's important going forward to know that, the smartest people and the most educated people on the subject all agree it's happening. So when I go door to door and people say this is a bunch of hooey, that kind of gets me a little bit. They want to kind of offend me, like, are you really sure? Like, the best in the world? I mean, that's like saying, I had a good argument. Oh yeah, it's like saying a contractor said this house needs proper foundations before it's laid, and a non-contractor says, yeah, no, it doesn't need it. Well, no, I'm going to take the word of the contractor. I don't want my house falling down. Now, to your point, winters are getting colder. How is climate change happening if winters are getting colder? Makes sense, right? So, everyone knows about the jet stream? You see it on the news, on the weather reports? Okay. So I don't have to explain what the jet stream is? Well, basically the jet stream actually takes air across the planet. And as you can see, as warm air increases, the jet stream is actually pushing farther north. When there's more hot air around the central part of the globe, and there's less cold air on the Arctic, the jet stream fluctuates. And this happens. So the jet stream is going more wild, it's going more up and down the way it has in the past. So when it goes way down deep, it's because it's happening because global temperatures are increasing. But the Arctic, even though it's getting warmer up here, it's still pretty darn cold. So it's pulling cold air down. So that's how come winters sometimes feel colder than what they really are. It's actually because global temperatures are increasing and adjusting the jet stream. And remember, just one incident doesn't change a pattern. You've seen this one guy in Congress, it was last year, he came into the United States Congress with a snowball and says, how could global warming be happening? I just pulled this snowball from outside. This is why. Yes?
I just want to point out for Mo's comment, when you look at that picture of the jet stream, the intriguing part about that is the size of the dip that comes down. Mm-hmm. As you said, it's gotten bigger. When it gets farther down in the south, the sides move farther apart as well. In fact, the jet stream has moved over top of Ottawa in the last 15 years, and we are affected by the upward swing of that air movement far more than we used to be. I know as an astronomer, because that movement of air screws up my use of the telescope. So I see this effect in a big time way.
Wow.
As a result of this, it causes greater temperature variation. So we actually do see colder colds and hotter hots and bigger swings in between because of this jet stream effect.
Exactly. Thank you. And another point, just real quick before I forget, is actually the disruption in the jet stream also creates hurricanes. This I'm not an expert on. Anyone else knows this more than I do, please speak up. But when there's warm air above the lake and it's colder in the water, that creates more of a climate for hurricanes, more frequent hurricanes and more powerful hurricanes. And it happens over the Atlantic, and I point out, it happens all over, but I point out the Atlantic because this is the ocean that affects us the most. This is where Hurricane Sandy was, and I can't blanking on some other ones, but you can probably think of others that have hit the United States coast recently. What was the one that hit?
Katrina.
Katrina, thank you. Katrina, obviously, that was a big one.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think there is, oh, here it is, yeah. Hurricanes have doubled in the Atlantic since the 1980s. Doubled. And again, if you remember that graph I showed you of temperatures, 1980s is pretty much where things started to get going on here. Okay, next skeptic comment I've gotten. This is something I was talking about with John earlier, who is a geologist, so if I'm wrong on anything, I'm sure you'll correct me.
I'll keep you.
Yeah.
That's my brother. that opinion right there.
Yeah.
Okay, my memory isn't very good.
He's a skeptic.
I hear this all the time. I heard this from, I guess I can tell you, your member of provincial parliament said this straight out in a debate. He said, this is what he believes. Our member of parliament believes this. Now, my response to that, because I got to speak after it, was, to a certain degree, that's true. There are dips and flows in ice ages that create. But the last ice age, which went all the way down past New York, there was a sheet of ice that went down past New York City and Toronto. The ice melted over 1,100,000 years. We're seeing ice melt within 20. That's the major difference. This affects, all sorts of wildlife, because over a 12,000 year period, they can adapt. 20 years, not so much. This I've heard. There's actually more carbon that's released from a volcano than the amount of carbon that people are trying to reduce. Has anyone ever heard this one before? No? Okay, new to you? Okay, I have heard it. There's more carbon that comes out of a volcano that erupts than, we try to cut. If we cut down on fossil fuels, if we cut down on using oil, we do all this and do all that, it's not going to make a difference because volcanoes are still going to erupt.
And if we don't cut down,
What's that?
if we don't cut down, then you have twice as much.
That's a good point, thank you. Here's the real fact. That volcanoes do release some carbon, but 20 million tons annually. This is what we released in 2003. This is what was man-made in 2003. Almost 30 billion. Currently, we now produce almost 40. So, volcanoes have been on this planet since before humans. If you ever study, the history of the Earth, the beginning of the Earth, it was full of lava, full of volcanoes, asteroids were hitting it non-stop. The Earth can adjust to volcanoes. This, not so much. The sun, patterns in the sun, is actually creating more heat. Heard this? I see some nodding. Some people have heard this one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, according to NASA, there's been some play of, in past ice ages of the sun having a difference, but over the last 35 years, no impact. And again, our Arctic is melting. The ice around Antarctica is increasing. Now, this is one that I find tough, because the scientists haven't really been able to answer this one so much. Best guess is that, well, actually, can we play the video? That's it, you just want to click on that. So you'll see the video from NASA. Huh?
It'll take me a second, I have to connect to the network.
Okay, well, you don't have to, it's only 1:30, and I'll explain it. Basically, it's NASA saying they don't know exactly how to explain it.
Okay.
That sums it up. Some arguments I've heard is it actually is created by global warming as well. That the fact is that the oceans temperatures are rising, which is evaporating, which is creating condensation, which is making it rain more around the Arctic. That rain freezes, causing more snow, and that is probably what's causing the ice to increase around the Antarctic. But that's a best guess answer. If you know anything about scientists, you'll know that they don't actually say yes or no to something until they disprove all other possibilities. So they never really say the answer is this. They say the answer is not everything else but this. That make sense? So, possible solutions. And I put it in bracket, or I put a question mark there because reality is what is the right solution? Hard to say. So, our current political parties fit in here somewhere. And if you want me to say where I think they fall into, I'm welcome to, but you guys can kind of guess where they probably go into. Well, just to kind of explain what they all are. Do nothing is pretty obvious. I can say this because it was in the news that the Conservative government has said that they are reluctant to put in a policy on emissions until they get a consensus across the continent. So get Mexico and the United States on board. That's great. You obviously want all of the other countries on board because the environment really doesn't know national borders. That makes sense. But to wait and do nothing really doesn't. And when I was at the Eco Justice Clinic, a scientist there really kind of, said things to me that gave an analogy that really stuck with me. I really liked it. Canada creates 2% of the climate change in this world. So we're responsible for about 2%, okay? Doesn't sound like much. In World War II, Canada provided 2% of the Allied forces. And we had an impact there. So there's no reason why we can't lead the charge again of this new disaster. And when you said that, I thought I liked that. I thought that really resonated with me. Because, as Canadians, we can do something together if we put our minds to it. Cap and trade, if you don't know what that is, that's basically you put this limit. Anyone know, for the sports fans, salary cap? It's kind of like that. There's this cap of what each company is allowed to produce to pollute, the emissions that they're allowed to produce. They're given these credits or certificates to prove that this is how much that they can produce. Every company who produces carbon gets these credits. Now, if one company uses all of their credits and another company only uses a portion of it, that company that only uses a portion of it can sell those credits to the company that uses a lot of it. The theory is that one of these other companies that don't use much will probably cut down even more so they have more credits to sell so they can actually make more money. And that's going to curb the overall emissions. That's the theory behind it. Does that make sense? No? Does it make sense in the way I explained it? Or
It doesn't make sense. I
agree
mean,
with it?
maybe it's me, but it just doesn't make sense to me because it just sounds to me that you're just robbing Peter to pay Paul, that this companies will cut down so that they can make money with these fictitious pieces of paper that is issued by some government. It's just, it just doesn't ring true to be in any business sense. So, in other words, if the steel company wants to pay more, they pay more, and they charge more, and the taxes go up. So it makes no difference to our society as to the amount of carbon that's being used. And it's to me just a fiction to allow these companies that need it or wanted to go ahead and do it with some payment to somebody.
That's pretty much the big criticism of it. Pretty much summed it up. I'm definitely not saying I'm for that. I'm just saying, explaining what it is. But that's essentially what it is. A lot of people are saying that it's not really going to have much economic or environmental impact because the companies that can afford to buy them are going to buy it and it's going to keep polluting. Essentially, yeah. Thank you, by the way. And then you have carbon tax. I'm sure you've heard a lot about that. The government really kind of pushes that out as a job-killing carbon tax. Carbon tax is basically what it sounds, is that where someone is polluting, they put a tax on it. Currently, just to give you some perspective, currently the British Columbia government has a carbon tax. They're the only, Quebec kind of has one, Alberta actually even has a really tiny small one, but it really doesn't have much of an impact. The only real true one is British Columbia. And they've had there's no evidence in the past, I think it's been, I don't know, it's been at least over 5 years. There's been no signs of hurting the economy in any way. In fact, their GDP is on average 1% higher than the federal GDP. Maybe I'm talking up a little bit because there's an element to the carbon tax of what the Green Party is suggesting, which again I talk about trying to be nonpartisan, but that's essentially what the carbon tax is. And that's my presentation. So I mean, I'm willing to open up the questions if anyone has any.
Any answers?
That's why I put it at the question mark there. I certainly know what I would do. Again, I can talk about that, but I don't want to cross any lines.
Oh, God, if you don't cross the lines, I'm going to be disappointed.
Oh, okay.
I mean, you're from the Green Party, and I've been anxious. I've been living this closet life, and I'm anxious to hear a Green Party speaker say something.
Oh, okay. Well, here I am. First off, thank you. And two, hopefully I will be able to explain this in a way that made sense. Because it's very important, as you've probably seen with Elizabeth May at the debates, being that we're in fourth place, we have to be better. We have to know our stuff. Hopefully I was able to express that here today on something that's really not fun, but hopefully it made sense at the very least. So, the Green Party's platform point right now is to have what's called fee and dividend, which again is kind of into the carbon tax realm, and that's maybe why I hinted at it, that there's actually been no evidence to show that a carbon tax hurts the economy in any way. In fact, with BC, it's actually higher. Because I was reading a study just yesterday, so brief up on this, and any sort of areas where it has hurt the BC economy, and they use the cement industry as one element where it hurt a little bit, it was offset in other areas. The fee and dividend program is like this. We basically put a fee on carbon, which is a better way of saying tax, but it's a fee. We put a fee on the polluters, and they're obviously going to pass that on to the consumer. That's business. That's how it goes. We know that. Rather than collecting that fee and then using it for other things, we keep it in an account, and at the end of the year, divide it up equally amongst Canadians. So you get that money back. So it's not like it's gone forever. It's just shifted in a sense. The advantage of you is if you were to use less carbon yourself, and there's still big polluters out there, until they start to adjust their habits, you're still going to be getting that money. Does that make sense?
Sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare.
Well, it's meant to be less bureaucratic, because if it went into the coffers, then it's money that any department will be asking for example. This is just kept completely separate, and then it's just divided up equally.
Why wouldn't you invest that money in renewable resources?
Because we have other areas where we're going to be doing that. For example, I didn't bring my book with me because I didn't even want to bring any of my stuff in here. So I'm kind of going off the top of my head. But for example, the oil and gas industry gets somewhere between, this is a rough number, I'm trying to think about it in my head, I think it's like $200 million a year in subsidies. That's money that we would stop providing to the oil and gas industry and use that for greener technology. This is just simply meant to curb carbon emissions.
It seems to me everybody's interested in an improved environment, but clearly the alternative to pipelines
Yes.
is rail traffic or truck traffic and so on. And it seems to me that the environmental people would be much more beneficial to the country if they encouraged the pipeline company to build better and stronger pipelines. Because we have to get the gas. I heard a little joke, I guess you'd say. Somebody said, we need gas. They said, Elizabeth may be able to travel by broomstick, but not the rest of us really can't. We have to rely on this stuff.
Sure. Broomstick comment aside, I'm glad you asked. So first with the energy pipeline, much of it is not new. In fact, it's old pipeline that's about 40 years old. They're retrofitting old natural gas pipelines. And they had one that was the Enbridge pipeline. The Enbridge pipeline was one that ran through the United States, and it ran through the Kalamazoo River in Michigan, and it broke because it had a similar structure of pipeline. And it took 3 years and about $1 billion to clean up. And it was the same thing that they're shipping, which is my next point, to talking about having less oil being shipped by transport. What that was the same thing that would be shipped through the Energy East pipeline. It's not oil, it's bitumen. And bitumen has to be diluted with a diluent to create what's called dilbit. And diluent, what was the first thing I said?
To get it moving in the pipeline.
Yeah. It's as it's right now, bitumen, that was the word I was looking for. Bitumen is like a molasses type substance. So you can actually have it in glass and turn it upside down and it won't fall out right away. It's like peanut butter. So that obviously doesn't ship. So they have to dilute it with this to create diluent. That has to be shipped to Alberta, and it was shipped by train and by transport. So the argument that would take less, that shipping oil is going to take less dangerous substances off the road and create less transporting is wrong, simply because it has to be mixed with this fluid, and that has to be shipped up there. So if it's not going this way, it's not going this way.
I'm not going to argue with your particular position on the environment, but I had been recently looking at a Greenpeace magazine, and as I flipped through the magazine, the particular writers that were writing in there, speaking very strongly in favor of climate protection. Mm-hmm. They were opposed to oil pipelines, and they were opposed to, in fact, petrochemical energy sources altogether. And they were opposed to wind turbines, and they were opposed to covering the Earth's surface with solar panels, and they were opposed to nuclear power. And I was left wondering, okay, so we've got problems, and the people are real quick to point at what the problems are.
Yeah.
But what are viable solutions?
Well, the broomstick.
Saying no, well, we don't live in the times of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Saying no, just outright no to all these things, we're going to end up being back in the Dark Ages. So I think what we really need is some strong investment in newer replacement type of technologies.
Yes.
As Diane had mentioned, why don't we look to invest some of this money back into other types of renewable energy sources that are perhaps less offensive
Yeah.
to the majority of the people.
Yeah.
And that I see is the huge challenge.
Yeah.
You just can't say no and cut everything off, because we're going to be back living in tents and farming out of our own little backyard, and that's not going to work.
And nobody's gonna stop driving cars, so,
Yeah.
you know, when you don't have a government with political will to impose rules and regulations, it does break down. Nobody likes over government, but that is a very important aspect of government. Protection, no, it should be number one.
Yep.
But I don't know what the answer is.
I don't know either.
I don't know either. Yeah.
You're right, no one's gonna stop driving cars. I mean, I came here
Yeah.
that way. But it's shocking to me that in 2015 we're still using a combustible engine when we don't need to.
Well, will science save us? Will the science of fuel economy save us?
They're already like companies like Tesla are working on these electric cars, but there's issues with those as well. Like the battery cells are not perfectly environmentally friendly. There's always going to be a trade-off. What's worse?
That's simple.
You know, like people say, oh, people who want to cut the oil and gas industry, what's your option? Just leave it in the ground. Well, I compare that to like a train going along. If you just stop a train, bad things happen, right? You just can't stop a train. You have to let it come to a slow stop. That's basically our position. Is like, we're not saying, stop oil and gas tomorrow. We're saying start the transition away from it. Now, I like to be completely honest with people and, not try to sugarcoat anything. Wind and solar has its challenges too, mainly storage. I mean, it can create the energy, but then what do you do with it? It's hard to harness that energy and hold on to it, and that's the big problem with wind and solar. Keeping the Government of Ontario FIT program aside, because a lot of people are down on windmills and solar panels because of the FIT program. That's not to do with wind and solar energy. That's just, the government entering into a lot of bad contracts.
Yes.
Which gives wind and solar a really bad name. But them themselves are very good forms of energy, but the problem is as I said, is harnessing it. But 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, there was no solar panels. I mean, technology is advancing. I mean, windmills, there's been windmills for hundreds of probably centuries. But the point where they increased in power production has vastly increased. So it's just a matter of just keeping on trying to find ways to improve this technology. Like the Greenpeace article, which I disagree with. I mean, yeah, I guess in theory, if there's like some sort of magical way to get energy, sure. But the fact is that we are a society that lives on power. We need it. We just have to find the best way to go about getting it. And we can't shut the door because the source of energy that we use now is where we've hitched all our eggs to. If that's the case, that's going to lead to an example of Dutch disease in this country. Does everyone know what that is? Where you rely so much on one form of energy or one resource that if that resource goes away, your economy is in trouble. That's another example of why we should start to shift as soon as possible, because fossil fuels is a finite resource. It's going to end at some point. Once it's used up, it's gone. I had this one scientist when I was at Legal Justice Cleanses, he was just saying, let's just wait it out. It's going to happen anyway. He thinks it's going to happen in 35 years. We're going to be out of fossil fuels. I don't think that's going to happen because they keep finding new ways to find new oil somewhere, like Arctic offshore drilling. That's happening because the Arctic ice has receded, and now they can, try to get down in there a bit more.
What's happened in Europe, if fuel was, let's say, $4 a liter, I think there'd be a lot more smaller cars on the road. I would be one of them.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah.
I've heard arguments that and I'm not saying I agree with this, I'm just saying things I've heard.
No.
I've heard arguments that saying if people want to use cars, then they should be 100% responsible for paying for the maintenance of the roads. Re-asphalting, plowing them in the winter, and you know, that all comes out of, I don't know, somebody add that on to tack onto the fuel, for example.
I believe in toll roads.
Well, this would essentially be that, they pay for everything. And anyone who uses a bicycle or uses public transportation, they get to save on those costs. You know, something to think about.
Yeah.
I'll say definitely with the bicycle, as long as the bicycle helps on the dirt and stays off my asphalt.
Well, that's against the new law, by the way.
There are 4 political parties, and the Green Party is 1 of 4.
Yes.
The other 3, other than the Green Party, you can kind of see them in an economic spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Where does the Green Party fit in that spectrum of economic?
I actually just looked at one of those, I think, last week. It's pretty close to the center. Both there's 2 types of spectrum. One is economic. One is I don't know how you describe it. Free governance. So at the top you have anarchy, and down here you have dictatorships.
Social justice.
Yeah, and we're pretty much center on both sides, on both scales. We believe, from a fiscal standpoint, we're probably the closest to a conservative voter. A lot of the people who were previously, who drafted the constitution of the Green Party were actually former progressive conservatives. Elizabeth May actually used to work in the Rotary government. Not as a conservative, but she worked in the government. I can talk about her if you want. But then there's also the social platforms. We're very socially conscious and socially aware. So, I mean, the Green Party comes out of people who were seeing what the other parties were and thinking that, trying to be the party that the other parties were lacking. If that makes sense.
I once went to a conference, and the concept that came out of this conference had to do with a concept called burning platform. The idea was that nothing really happens in the human circumstance that has to happen for sure until you're standing on the burning platform. And as soon as you're on the burning platform, your thinking becomes very clear because you've got a small number of alternatives.
Yeah.
Are we on a burning platform in the environmental world?
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Certainly people do think that that's true. I've known people, does anyone know Stephen Lewis?
Obviously.
Yeah, he was actually a visiting professor when I did my undergrad, so I actually took a class with him. Really great guy. But very, very, very left wing, and he makes no bones about it. I mean, I'm sure he probably talked a lot about Thomas Mulcair now. That's like way too far right for him. And he basically said, straight up, he thinks we're beyond the point of return. And we should start be preparing for worst case scenario. He said this right in the classroom. He says, don't worry about trying to fix the problem. It's broken. What do we do to recover? I don't think we're at that point yet. I like to be optimistic. I mean, nature has a way of surviving. It's proven to time and time again. We're certainly getting close to that tipping point. Some people thought that we passed it. Some people think it keeps being pushed back a bit. I can't say where that tipping point is yet. But yeah, if you were to use that burning platform analogy, I'd say, I mean, we're pretty close to it. I mean, even the point where now a US president is talking about a carbon tax and keeping emissions, or keeping the global temperature between 2 degrees Celsius. I wasn't even sure he would actually say that, to be honest with you.
Well, he's going out.
He's going out, yeah, he doesn't care. That's good.
Watch it, John.
Yeah. So we'll see if this conversation continues. When's the election? 2016 is the U.S. election?
Oh,
Next year, yeah.
well, they have one every year.
Yeah. So we'll see if it happens after that. But yeah, we're definitely close to that, I'd say.
Thanks.
That's it? All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.